Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive's author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby, and your host, DJ Payne.
G'day, this is Thrive Deeper, your favourite Bible study podcast, episode 119. It's your old mate DJ Payne here, and on this episode, Matthew Jacoby and I sit down and get into Deuteronomy. This is Deuteronomy Part 1. We're going to spend 2 episodes on the book of Deuteronomy. This is a very special book. It is the final book in the Torah. It is the final book of the 5 books of Moses. And on this episode, we're going to try to cover a bit of a bird's eye view of this book. And in the next episode, we're going to dive down a little bit deeper into it. Also, we've got a lot of exciting news happening on our social media front. If you've ever wanted to know what's happening with Thrive Deeper on Facebook and on Instagram, well, all your questions are going to be answered in this episode of Thrive Deeper. So pull out that Bible, open it up to the book of Deuteronomy as Matthew and I sit down on this episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew, if nothing else, you and I are a couple of Bible nerds.
Okay.
You know, and I say that in the nice...
Yeah.
Is that a nice thing to... Is that a good...
Are we not cooler than that?
Maybe in your mind we're cooler
I'm under
than
this
that.
impression that we're just the coolest people.
Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but I sometimes honestly look at my life and go, man, I'm a Bible nerd. Like I look at like sacks of Bibles that I'm, as I'm moving everything in and out of the studio, I've got all these Bibles. Even my wife was like, "Oh, you've got a problem. You know, there's too many Bibles here."
I know why you're saying it, because of our conversation about audio Bibles.
You've walked in here and you're raving about an audio Bible, and I'm raving.
That's right.
And I'm like,
okay.
You beat me to the punch.
I concede. We are the biggest Bible nerds. That's right.
So let's take a moment as we before we get into the meat of today's episode. Let's give a bit of a rave here about there's a million different Bible apps and Bibles and everything else we can talk about, but you're in love at the moment with one particular narration of the Bible.
Yeah, that's right. David Suchet's reading of the NIV. He does Old and New Testament. David Suchet, I think, is Suchet. He is the guy that plays Poirot on, he's a British actor. Okay. So very British kind of reading. I actually love, I love that.
You like that British accent.
That's right. But it's just a beautiful reading. And I've been listening through a number of books of the Bible. And it is really, the difference between reading and listening is a really important difference, actually. I think it's good to do both, but I'm just...
Well, let's pin that right there for 1
loving
second,
it.
because I want to give a massive shout out to the Bible app called Dwell. You've heard me talk about it before. DWELL, Dwell.
Yeah.
It was a Kickstarter project originally by these 2 brothers, and they've created, I think, for any phone platform, the best audio Bible experience. Multiple translations. You can read along now in the latest version. It is a subscription based. You can try it for free, but then you have to get a subscription based. I am working with, I've been speaking to one of the brothers who created it about getting a code that we can give out on Thrive so people can get it at a discounted rate, which would be great. But a wonderful way. And I am, for someone who just loves reading through the Bible again and again and again and again, the audio, listening to the audio of the Bible being read to me in these different translations and different accents.
It's an amazing app because you choose your translation, choose your accent.
Yeah, you can change it to go in midstream. It
has the text come up as it's being read.
It's really, really cool. Yeah. But I want to echo you, and this is where we're going to get into the meat of today's episode. Going through Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
I mean, Deuteronomy starts off with Moses sitting down.
So did you listen to it as well?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Because I don't know why I think it just occurred to me I might try listening to it, and because I'd read it not that long ago, and the experience
totally different.
Yeah, it's a different kind of experience, and it's probably much truer to how it was originally experienced.
Amen. Because at the beginning of the book is Moses sitting down with this new generation and saying, and the whole book is basically sermons by Moses.
Yeah,
and so me listening to it, I made me feel like I was one of the people sitting there at Moses' feet, listening to this experience.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that's right.
And again, the same as you. I was like, when I heard something, and I was like, "What? I've never heard that before."
Yeah,
and I realized I've read it 100 times, but listening to it activates a different part of your brain,
and
or something.
particularly if it's being read by someone who's a really good reader, and this is what I love about David Suchet's reading. He's actually a very strong Christian, but he reads this with such beautiful emphasis and as I've heard, because I've listened down through the years a number of different audio Bibles, and it does bring another dimension of it out. Maybe it's because I can be quite analytical when I read, or because just reading, text is just text, and it being read to you brings that subjective element into the experience of the text.
I find myself imagining more.
Yeah.
Like it sort of sparks that imagination part of my brain when I'm hearing it.
It's quite a different experience.
Yeah. Well, again, while we're down the Bible nerd hole, do you find yourself, when Matt Jacoby says, I'm reading the Bible, I imagine you on a screen.
I read on like a Bible app,
On an iPad or
on an iPad. Yeah, generally on my iPad.
Okay.
And I do that because I can drop in notes and and everything. And in the past I used to love my wide margin Bibles, and I'd get those, and I would always treat my Bible like a workbook. So I've got a pile of Bibles at home that I've used up, so to speak.
They're great,
and they're just full of notes and everything. But now it's just an ongoing thing on the app. But the great thing about the app too, because mine is associated with a very big Bible program called Logos Bible software.
That'd be the biggest one.
Yeah, it'd be one of the biggest ones. Yeah, and it has, and so I can just pull in, a parallel commentary, or if I wanted to check up something, or
different translations.
What does that mean? Or I can press on a word and or I can flip to the original language and see what it's saying there or whatever. Yeah.
So that's how you experience it. I'm still a paper guy.
Yeah, you are. You love your paper Bibles.
I love my paper Bibles. Yeah. I mean, I go between. I find myself lately, for all my apps and everything that I've got and all my Bibles, I have been spending a bit of time on Bible Gateway. The website,
which is good. Yeah,
and again, who's reading a Bible on a website? Me, of course. So I'm finding myself flicking through that, but I do. There's still something really. I'm going to use the word religious for me in a positive sense. Yeah. I feel like I'm entering something sacred when I pull open the Bible and I open the pages up and I'm going through that. There's still something really. For some people, they might go, "Oh, come on, hurry up."
Yeah, maybe I'll go get myself another wide margin Bible and do that again one day.
Oh dear! All right, so that's our setup. There you go. You know who you're listening to. Welcome if you're brand new to Thrive. You know who you're dealing with here. I'm DJ. We got Matt Jacoby on the other side there, and we are we've got a 2-part series on Deuteronomy coming up. This is part 1. Part 2 in a fortnight. And we're doing something a little bit different. We're really going to try. We've said we're going to do this in the past, but now we're really going to try. We're not going to go, for the sake of, you might look at the title of this podcast, and like we do with all of the Thrive Deeper podcasts, we try to put the chapters of the books that we're doing. Yeah. Well, this will just be the first half of Numbers, and the next week will be the second half of Numbers, but we're not going to actually do that, okay? So the warning label is don't look at the title there. We're going to go today in a really big picture of some of the big themes.
General features of
Deuteronomy. And then next week, we're going to pick up on a couple of really some of the sore sticking points, some of the issues that people have with Deuteronomy, and we'll sort of deep dive into that. So to give the bigger picture around Deuteronomy, where we have here. This is the final book in the books of Moses, the book otherwise known as the Torah, otherwise known as the Pentateuch.
Yep, that's right.
Which is the 5 books, that we ascribe to Moses as the author. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This is the 5th and final book, and this is, no spoilers here, the end of Moses' life. This is the end of Moses' ministry, his life. Spoiler here at the last chapter, Moses dies.
Yeah, that's right. And so when you say we Moses is the author, clearly throughout the text, God says to Moses, write this down, write that down, write this down. So Moses is writing things down. What we also know is that there is a final editor. Like it'll say, and this has been there to this day. Yes. Of course, you get Moses' own death is narrated in the book. So
Moses didn't write it down, his own death. And then said, there we go, guys, put that in. I'm off I go to die. Right. So there's obviously narrators and who are outside of Moses speaking in.
Yeah, like a final editor who puts, is putting things into their final form.
So we have Moses. So I always say when I talk about these 5 books of Torah, I say Moses and the team. Yeah. Moses and his team were working on these books together. So this is the end. This is a very special book when it comes to a lot of Jewish ideas, a lot of Jewish tradition and things that we'll see throughout the scripture. But just to give you a context, if you're new to this, if this is your first time diving into the Bible and everything, this is the final part of the life of Moses. And so we have the idea that the Israel was in Egypt for 400 years roughly, and they prospered, they were really prosperous for a time, and then under a new Pharaoh, they were made to be slaves. During that time of slaves, Israel was under great persecution, and out of that persecution came Moses, a very special child, one of the Levite clan, out of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses ends up, as you know, of some of the movies and the stories, ends up running away from Egypt, gets married, has children, spends 40 years out there being a shepherd, and then God calls him back to meet his brother and to meet the rest of the family and to take Israel out of Egypt. That happens. God does miraculous things.
Famous story of the Exodus.
Yeah, the amazing Exodus. And God takes them out. He provides for them, does amazing things, but Israel will not obey, and they complain bitterly. In fact, there's rebellions against Moses continually. And so God finally has enough, and he says, okay, that's it. All of the generation 20 years older and now will wander through the wilderness for 40 years and die in the wilderness. And then it's that next generation who are 20 and up who will be coming in and take the land. And that's pretty much what has happened.
Which is what necessitates this Deuteronomy means, the second, Deutero is number 2, and
Duo.
law. It's not that it's a second law, it's the second giving of the law, because, of course, you've got a new generation. So the generation that had received the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai, Exodus chapter 20 and following, they've passed away. So this is now a kind of second Sinai moment, here on the other side of the Jordan. Moses stands up and again communicates to this next generation
it's an amazing
God's purposes and God's law.
Exactly. So it's a lot of history. It's Moses retelling the story. It's Moses then retelling the law, as you said, the second giving of the law, and also clarifying some things, reminding him what's going to be important as they enter into the new land, what laws are going to be important with that, and then. And then finally, the end of it is straight up prophecy. The end of it that we might get into is Moses saying, "This is what is going to happen, both good and bad, in the future. Be prepared for this and this and this."
And that's and I think an important point here is that when we talk about law, and the Hebrew word is Torah. When we speak of the law, it's not just lists of rules. We're actually talking about a covenant. So this is something. Something much more relational. It's a joining together of two parties, where God says, the covenant is very much God saying, I want to bless you. This is my purpose for you. This is who I want you to be. But in order to step into that, in order for that to happen, you need to stick with me. You need to walk with me, closely with me, because if you don't, it's going to be very polarized for you, and it's going to go very badly. So, so it's actually not just God telling his people what they should and shouldn't do. It's actually God saying to them what he is actually promising to do. Like primarily, it is in the context of the fact that God wants to bless them.
Amen.
Okay. God is is announcing his purpose, announcing his promises. But, in the same way as God said to Abraham, leave your country and your father's household and all of those customs behind and come and, follow me and walk with me.
Yeah.
He's basically saying the same thing to these people. He's saying, you're going to stick with me. And the laws really are, this is how we stick with God.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want to use the right word here. So it's not that God's saying, I greatly desire a relationship with you. I greatly desire
that's right.
to manifest myself amongst you and bless the world through you.
Yeah.
This is how we do it.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm inviting you into this.
Yeah.
This is good. And Moses, this is the amazing thing about this book. If, you sometimes say, you'd want to have a mentor, a spiritual mentor. Maybe it's just me as a man.
Yeah.
I think it might be a masculine thing sometimes to want a strong mentor to guide you through life. And I've wanted that all my life. I've wanted to have strong, elderly, spiritual elders. God's blessed me with a couple. And I think, man, if only you could sit at the feet of, spiritual people and you go, well, who is in the world of Christianity, in the world of Judaism, even in, the Abrahamic faiths, as people want to call it, one of the top 3 most holiest people is Moses.
Yeah. And again, not without his, not perfect,
no.
But he really, and in fact, in the book of Hebrews, he is the one against whom Christ is compared because for the Jewish people, Moses was the greatest. There was no one greater than Moses.
Exactly.
So there's quite a bit of effort given to actually showing that there actually is one, and that is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So Moses is held up in high esteem throughout
Exactly.
Scripture.
So for the Jewish mindset, Moses was the pinnacle.
Yeah.
And you hear that in Jesus when he's talking. He often talks to them about Moses and Abraham.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, the other one is Elijah, Moses and Elijah. And this is why on the Mount of Transfiguration, it was Moses and Elijah that appeared with Christ at that moment.
You mention these, great pillars of faith.
Yep.
And the greatest presented at different times in the Bible is Moses. My point being that the times in my life where I've wanted a mentor and to hear a mentor's heart towards God and what he would say to me, I think I have finally found it in the book of Deuteronomy. I've been listening to this book and imagining myself at the feet of Moses and hearing his heart. And it's not, it is a heart full of love. It's a heart full of grace. It's a heart full of pleading, but it's also a stern heart.
Yeah, well, it's the heart of God being expressed, really. I mean, Deuteronomy, and I think, yes, while this is Moses, let's not overplay the Moses thing, because what is very evident from the text is that this is God speaking through Moses. And one of the things that really struck me, and actually this is a listening thing, this is through listening to it, was the combination, sort of paradoxical perhaps combination of the tenderness of God. Such tenderness, oh, that their hearts would be inclined to love me. God is saying things like this. He's calling his people to him to walk with him. It's so tender, and yet it has also some of the harshest stuff as well. It's like the sternness of God is present here as well. So there's this real polarization here in this book, and you've got both of these things, these elements present. This is what stood out to me. So it's God saying, almost pulling his people in really close. It's like you stay right here. I'm holding you in really close. Because if you take one little step outside this embrace, it literally is going to be hell.
Yeah.
And it's like, is there anything there in between? Well, there's not really anything in between. And the fact, so for example, the fact that God says, and this sense of the holiness of God, that draw, and he's drawing his people into this holy place, this place of intimacy, where they nevertheless experience the holiness of God. And there is this sense here that in that place, there's this experience of reverent fear, not fear as in run away, but fear as in stick close. So for example, he says to his people, if anyone in one of your towns brings out an idol, but it's like, like that's such a serious thing. And because again, remember, there are real demonic powers behind the idols and all of this sort of stuff. And so if someone brings, this is the level of holiness in your town, brings out an idol, it's just so, it seems so over the top. That whole town, if there's idolatry in that town, the whole town has to get everyone destroyed, everything that the whole town has to get leveled and must never be built on again. It's like, is that a massive overreaction, or is this really that serious? And I think one of the keys to reading through Deuteronomy, you're going to struggle if you think that the sins that are being described, for example, idolatry, if you think it's really not that bad, or we as human beings really aren't that responsible, you're going to really struggle with the book of Deuteronomy, because what's clear is that, no, it really is that bad. To reject God for an idol, to turn to idols instead of God. It really is that bad, and we're really that responsible. So if we do that, I mean, your whole town, your whole tribe. I mean, this is the issue in cases where, and we're going to see this in Joshua, when at one point, 3 tribes go back over the Jordan to there, and there's a rumor that they hear that they have set up an altar. And so all the tribes come to go and destroy these 3 tribes, in a panic, right? Because they think this might be a pagan altar. And anyway, it turns out that it's not. But they're ready because they realize that if even one tribe, if one clan sets up a pagan altar in their midst, the whole nation could be destroyed because of that one thing. It's like, could we be that responsible? You think of situations where this person and their whole clan or their whole family are destroyed because of idolatry. It's like, we struggle with that because we think, one, surely it can't be that bad, and 2, surely we can't be that responsible that our actions could have so much consequence for others.
There's one other aspect I will put in there. That those 2 first points are there, but there's a little subtle one for me, and the third bit, and you mentioned it before. In the concept of an embrace with God, my mind, as I've been listening to it, I realised that in the past I've thought of God saying, if you leave the embrace, you'll be cursed. Like if you leave this embrace, this is where blessing is. If you leave, and I've in my mental state, I've been concentrating on, well, that's not fair. Leaving and getting cursed, I mean, that's pretty full on.
But then it is when the curses are described, it's full on.
It is full on. It's full on. But then I've realised I'm looking at it through the wrong thing. Listening to Moses speak, I hear the heart of Moses saying, as one who's experienced it, saying, no, you're concentrating on the wrong thing. If you knew the blessing that was here, closeness to God, the concept in your head of wandering out of that wouldn't even be there. Like, you're concentrating on the wrong thing. And it shows me yet again how broken and twisted and rebellious my heart is. And not to, I know we're doing a big overview, but to cut to the end of the chase, Moses realizes it too. About himself and about all the people to come and the rest of the world, that God is going to have to do something drastically different from what we even have to work on this heart thing.
That's right. And I think that the takeaway for me, when I listened to the whole book, and I listened to it in a couple of different occasions, I think in a couple of drives, long drives, and I came away with this impression that I have been taking this far too lightly. And I feel like I ascribe, a fair bit of seriousness to it.
Yes.
But I was quite, I found it sobering, really quite sobering, because I thought, oh no, this is really serious stuff. I'm now rethinking what I expose myself, what I do, how I, there's a whole lot of things in my life that I'm rethinking. Is this idolatry? Is this idolatry? Am I turning the wrong way with this? Am I allowing too much of this? Because, coming from a book that says, if even someone in your town brings out an idol, carves an idol and sets it up, the whole town needs to be razed to the ground and it shall never, ever be built on again. I just came away thinking, I think I take this way too lightly. I think I have far too casual an attitude, and it for me, something clicked actually, and I feel like something broke through for me. It was almost like God was saying, this sense of, okay, now you're starting to get it.
Yeah.
Now you're starting. It's almost like now you're ready to actually know me as God, because it actually is that important, and I really am that holy.
Yeah.
Are you ready? It's like, this is the fear of the Lord, not scared of God, run away from God scared, but a fear of the Lord, an absolute reverence, and the fear is a sense of absolute regard that makes me run to God and doesn't dare put one finger outside that zone of blessedness. And what you're saying is that there is an immense sense of blessedness, and in the embrace of God, the love and the care and the tenderness and the promise in that place is just superlative.
Yeah.
And yet you put one leg outside of that, and so much of the blessing just begins to drain away.
And the reverse of that is true. And this is what I really got, again, by listening to it, that I didn't really get before. Moses says, in the he basically prophesies and he says at different times, about the curse.
Yeah.
If you walk away from God, there's going to be curse, and you're going to be gone, and you're going to be scattered, and you're going to be, and we know from history all these things happen. Yeah. And you're going to be this, and you're going to be, there's going to be a remnant, there's going to be hardly anybody, there's going to be a few of you, there's going to be nothing, there's going to be this, and yet, God is never far away. That's right. Like the same thing, like just a pinky.
There's so much grace.
There's just a pinky wanting to get back to the blessing. Oh, you're back in the blessing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's such a, in this thing, there's such a, the blessing is all there if we want to jump into it, and the curse is all there if we jump into it, and it really doesn't.
See, I think this is part of the problem here is the way that we take the grace evident in there. I feel like there's this misapplication of this idea that you just ask God and He will forgive you and restore you.
Yeah.
So what we can tend to do is we tend to adopt an idea of grace. It's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer actually referred to it as cheap grace.
Wow.
This idea that, your God will forgive me and it'll be all right. And almost this sense God doesn't take this too seriously.
Yeah.
No, He took this serious enough to actually come to us in Jesus Christ and suffer on a cross.
Yeah.
So this is actually a really serious business. And when I say that, when I talk about the sense of blessing draining out, I think there's this sense that we're just always blessed no matter what we do. If you wander off and almost this sense of taking for granted the grace of God. Yeah. But no, you have to stick with God very, very closely for your life to bear the fruit of blessedness. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
This sense of, Jesus, I am the vine, you are the branches. Remain in me. You've got to remain in me.
Yeah.
That's the key. And so there is this sense in Deuteronomy of the incredible seriousness of that you almost have to, and I would recommend actually listening to the whole thing
If you can.
Yeah, if you can. Like listen to it in at least a couple of big chunks and get the seriousness of, even the fact, and next in the next episode of Thrive Deeper, we'll talk about the invasion mandate,
yes,
which is one of the big issues. It's like you need to completely wipe out everything, everyone. It's like, and you think, and of course it's sort of a prefigurement of the final great judgment in a sense. It's a one-off prefigurement of that moment because the promised land is like a prefigures actually a new heavens and a new earth. Okay, so that the conquest, and so we'll say more about that in the next episode. Yeah. But you just get this sense of God purging. There is this purging, and so with that comes this sense of the holiness of God. That there is this sort of demonic religion that's taken such a deep root in that culture and in the people and the society. Yeah. That it's just all got to be completely. You can't even leave the animals alive, and put all. And it says, take all of the plant. All of in these some of these particular towns, and they may have been towns that were particularly given over to idolatry. Pile up all the stuff in the center and just burn it, and walk away. Yeah, pull the town down like Jericho. Never to be rebuilt again. Yeah. There are these. It's the extremity of it because of the holiness of God and the unholiness of what was going on there. So that impression hasn't for me been a negative impression. Yeah, because it's always against the backdrop of this grace of God, as Jesus says, gathering his children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. This is what is happening in Deuteronomy. It's so heartfelt. It's so tender. Yeah. But there's such an urgency to it. I love the fact that your mind, Matt, you quoted Jesus a few times there. You see Jesus echoing what Moses is echoing here. 100%. Jesus says, "Do not fear him who can harm the body, but fear the one who can, who can destroy both body and soul in hell, in Gehenna." I mean, this is like, Jesus is doing the same choose life. He's doing the same thing as Moses. Yeah. If your hand caused you to sin, cut it off. It's better, to enter life maimed than to go into hell with. It's just like Jesus. Lest we think that this is just all of that harsh Old Testament stuff. Yeah. No, tender, loving Jesus brings about the same polarizing effect. Yeah. That same expression of, on the one hand, the harshness of God, the sternness of God, and on the other hand, the tenderness and the grace and the love. We see that in the person of Christ as well. I
love that. All right, so there you go. Big words from Matt there. And this is all coming out of, and I want to reiterate this because I've heard some of your complaints. You're tired of going through these books of Moses. I know, people have been reading Thrive and stuff are like, really? And I know that some of you might be going, really, Matt, you got that out of Deuteronomy? You got that out of Deuteronomy? I want to encourage you and say, yeah, that's exactly what I've been getting out of Deuteronomy as well. Like, this is such a deep, heartfelt book from both the heart of Moses and the heart of God. Yeah. And it's rattled me in a sense that I'm excited about. It's that God rattling about it here. So that's the big overview. Let's take a quick break. We've said a lot about the big overview. We'll take a quick break. I've got some important information for you. We'll be back in a moment and Thrive Deeper as we go through the book of Deuteronomy. Family, it is your old mate DJ Payne here, and yes, I know how this goes. I interrupt in the middle of the show and you want to skip ahead, you want to hit that skip button on your podcast player. Look, please, just listen. It's my biggest fear that you just skip ahead here. I know what the usual thing is. I'm telling you to give, I'm telling you to do this, I'm telling you to click here, but I've got a little agenda for us today. I've got a little agenda, a few points, and this is our little business meeting together, okay? So listen up. If you're a business owner or you're doing something exciting in ministry, or maybe you've got a podcast yourself, listen closely. You've heard the Thrive podcast, Thrive Perspectives and Thrive Deeper. In the middle of every episode that we put out, that goes out to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people around the world, would you like to advertise? Would you like to buy these middle slots of advertising? We'd love to be able to partner with you and get your ideas, your business, your ministry, whatever it is that you're doing, out to the people. Maybe you've got something to advertise. Maybe it's a brand new album. Maybe it's a brand new song. Maybe it's a YouTube channel. Whatever it is, get in contact with us. We would love to sell you some advertising and get your message out there. Now, the other thing I'd love you to know is that we have an Instagram account now. Instagram, just search for thrivetoday.tv on Instagram. We're doing some great stuff over there, and we are changing our Facebook page and our Facebook group. Well, actually, the Facebook page is staying the same. If you look for Thrive Today, the Thrive Today page on Facebook, you'll find it there. That's a public page for it to follow everything that we're doing. But we're changing our groups. We're basically getting rid of our groups and just having one private Thrive supporter group. That means if you are a financial supporter to what we do at Thrive, and you can do that for as little as $5 a month over at thrivetoday.tv, part of the bonuses, part of the attraction of wanting to do that is you now get access to our private Thrive supporters group. We're putting videos on there. We're putting exclusive content on there. We're putting great stuff on there. We want you to take part of it. All right, so all you need to do is head over to thrivetoday.tv and become a supporter. All right, that's the agenda. That's it for now. So did you get that? The agenda is advertising is open. We've got an Instagram account and Facebook is changing. All of that, let's get back into the show now on Thrive Deeper. Welcome back to Thrive Deeper, episode 119. It's your old pal DJ here with Matt Jacoby. And Matt, we are going through the book of Deuteronomy. I feel like we've just given the biggest personal overview over this book.
Yeah, well, we're not really going through it. We're hovering over the top, looking at it, a very big picture.
Yeah. So as we get into it, we've sort of given you a bit of a an outline what it is. It's this sermons by speeches by heartfelt addresses by the one of the pillars of the faith, Moses himself, to this next generation of Israel as they're about to enter the promised land. And I think a good place to start is probably one of the key passages in Deuteronomy, is in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Right at the beginning of Deuteronomy chapter 6 is where we have what some translations will call the greatest command. Others, the Jewish faith, call it the Shema because it takes from the Jewish word right at the beginning here. But it's basically, from Deuteronomy 6:4, depending on the translation that you have, Moses saying to the whole generation of Israel, listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words that I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates. That big... Yeah. That's like the opening gambit for Moses.
Yeah, and it really sets the tone for the book of Deuteronomy. It's actually what I love about the book of Deuteronomy is the focus on the heart.
Yeah.
God is after the hearts of his people. This is not just do this. It's not just a code of ethics, and so that the main thing is that you just do the right thing and you'll be right. No, that's not what this is after. All of the imperatives are asking for an attitude of the heart, oh, that my people would love me, that they would fear me in the sense of reverence and awe, that they would, and even I mean, the word shema, listen, it has this strong sense of heed, obey.
Yeah.
This idea of obeying, of listening isn't just listen to, but really heed. It's much deeper heart thing. Love the Lord your God.
Go into that a little bit more, because I think we don't get that, because we hear listen and we go, okay, I'm listening. Like a teenager, you're talking to your teenage child. Are you listening to me? Yes, I'm listening. And they repeat back word for word what you're saying. Moses doesn't mean just listen or hear. He doesn't talk. He's not talking about, have the ability to repeat back even the words that I'm telling you. It's greater than even memorizing this verse. What does this word mean? And is there a better English translation that we could have?
Perhaps, and I'm just looking up some notes because I just read something about this recently. I think the idea of heeding, because it's not just listen to this. There's a willing listenness, like lean into this, really get this, hear the heart of God in this, take this seriously, give this your ultimate consideration. That's what really listening, and they're really actually, it highlights the fact that there's only one way to listen to God. If you don't listen like that, you don't actually hear.
Wow.
So for example, you could tell me, hey Matt, I want you to go and I want you to do this, right? And I could hear you, I could listen to you and not take you very seriously, which I'm sure sometimes you think that when you give me advice that I don't take you very seriously.
Have you been reading my diary again?
So, but it would be possible for me to listen to your advice and not take it seriously. Yeah. With God, if I don't take it seriously, I don't actually even hear.
Wow.
Like I actually don't hear God unless my heart is so oriented that I do take it seriously. And the reason is because God won't be less than God. So he won't be an external sound or or he won't be anything to us if we don't actually experience him as the absolute, as the one whom we give absolute regard for. So, the experience of, if you feel like, maybe you feel like God is being silent in your situation. Maybe you feel like, you're reading scripture and it's just, you're not getting anything, or then it's worth considering how seriously are you actually taking this? Is your heart, the good soil, thinking of the parable of the sower?
Yeah.
It's Jesus often says, he who has ears, let him hear. And what he means is, he doesn't mean, he who can hear the physical sounds, because people were hearing the physical sounds, but there was a sense that there really only is one type of people who will really hear the voice of God.
Those who have ears to hear.
That's right, those who have ears to hear. And it's those who are willing to let God be God, willing for God to be God, that I'm going to give this absolute regard. So, you get people say, well, if God wants to reveal himself to me, and almost as a matter of curiosity, if, I'd like to see if there is a God, and why doesn't God just say, hoi, hey, I'm over here? Yeah. Well, God won't do things to satisfy curiosity or in that sense. He will only actually reveal himself to those who are willing for him to be who he is. Lest God compromise his glory, lest God become less. This is so fundamental. God won't become less than God. Yeah. So either we know him as God, or he is in a very real sense kind of hidden in some sense from us.
Okay, so Moses then, as we break down this amazing, and this is I think this is the beating heart in Deuteronomy, this passage here, and a lot of commentators, a lot of people who do outlines and those type of things, a lot of preachers and people who prepare sermons would go on to say that in Deuteronomy chapter 6, the beginning of Deuteronomy chapter 6, this passage here is the greatest commandment. We have Jesus quoting it in the New Testament. We have people talking about it here. Yeah. But Moses, I want you to break down. This is what I heard, Matthew, as I'm listening to it, is that Moses says, these words that I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Now, are the words just that phrase that he said a couple of verses ago, or is it all of these commandments that he's giving?
All of these commandments.
Yeah.
It's very much all of these commandments. This is God saying, I want you to internalize this. So even the talk about them, put them on the walls, it's not just a legalistic requirement to write them up. It's actually, that's an expression of just make this part of who you are. Give this ultimate regard. So talk about it when you sit down, when you rise. Talk about it with your family, and so there's a sense of give this ultimate regard. Now you can't control the responses that your family will have about it, but there's a sense of you need to give this all of this first priority. That's in order that it can become, in a heart sense, that number one thing, your number one regard.
Yeah. I'm still me personally. I just to let the listener in here, this is all still very raw for me at the moment. I think in me listening and going through Deuteronomy and really contemplating about obedience and blessing and what it actually means to fear the Lord. If I sound like a bit of a sun mullet today on this episode, it's because I'm still dealing with it in my head and my heart before the Lord.
Yeah, and I would say coming off, actually, because I finished listening to, I've just come from being away, and I finished listening to Deuteronomy actually on the way up in the car, and there's something here, I think, that is a major realization for us in our culture, in which we seem to flatten this idea of transcendence and holiness and majesty, and we're very much inclined to this, God is my best buddy kind of thing, and it doesn't. The problem with that is that it's a misapplication of the idea of grace and forgiveness and the love of God and the intimacy of God, all of which are very true.
Yes.
But the God who is intimate is a God who is infinitely transcendent and holy. And Old and New Testament are affirming this, the importance, central importance of this reverent attitude. Love the Lord your God. But what is not envisaged there is just a slap on the back, God is my buddy kind of relationship. And one of the problems with that is that when people's expectations are shaped by that, it leads to necessarily kind of disillusionment because it just doesn't work like that. God's, unless we know God as God, we can't know. We will know Him on His, on His terms,
yeah.
and those are His terms. And so I feel like I am also in the fairly raw stages of recognizing what this actually means, and I feel like it's really significant. And while I was away, I went for this big long walk out in the wilderness, which is always good to do. and I was just really quite filled with this sense of the absolute greatness of God, which means that there is a sense in which God is hidden from my capacities. Like we see physical objects around us, but God is so much greater than that, like infinitely greater than that, that He'll not be reduced to a thing or an object and so there this transcendence of God means that God is very intimately present and yet in another sense hidden, that unless we're prepared to fear God and give absolute regard to Him as God, there's a sense of because through Christ we have access to God, but you still need to come to Him as God.
Yes.
You can't just sort of waltz in and slap God on the back and, and Psalm 130 is a classic expression, if you, O Lord, kept a record of sins, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, therefore you are feared. So the fear of the Lord is the result of this access that we have to a holy God.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's being, the people in Deuteronomy, these people are given access to this holy God. And this comes with enormous level of responsibility. Like, this is really good, but folks, if you get this wrong, if you misuse this, if you treat as profane things that are holy, there's kind of hell to pay. This is the thing about Deuteronomy that struck me.
What the thought that I've had, because, you know, I guess in my role here, you know, with Thrive, and then, you know, the fact that I do this podcast with you at our local church, and we have people, you know, chatting to me about that, and I'm a bit of a public persona. Like, I'm out there on social media a little bit more, and I do a bunch of, you know, different stuff. I'm not wandering through the wilderness like Matthew Jacoby here having times with the Lord as much as I want to be. But no, I'm teasing. But I seem to be out there, and I get a lot more of people talking to me.
Yeah.
And probably a little bit more honestly than what they would come and talk to the senior pastor of the church. And so I've had many, many people go, seriously, Deuteronomy? Like, I nearly lost my mind with Leviticus. Like, people I get, and I always go, I know. And because I do feel, because I've had those moments myself, but I'm now beginning to go, and I've had people literally straight up tell me, like, they don't even say Leviticus or Deuteronomy. They literally say to me, Old Testament? Why are we in the Old Testament? And I'm like, I get a little bit shaky around that, but I'm beginning to go, man alive, maybe it's these very books that are so dense and so hard for our modern minds to comprehend. Wouldn't it be funny? Wouldn't it be the funniest God thing of all that it's through these books that we don't want to read is how we actually get closest to God by understanding these books?
Yeah. I think their very difficulty promises something.
Yeah.
Like, it's their very difficulty that and the fact that they challenge us the most.
Yeah.
I actually thought, reading through, I mean, I'm actually listening now in the book of Judges, and I'm thinking, this is really tough. Like, it, you know, I mean, I went, you know, Deuteronomy, you know, Joshua, and then into Judges, and I'm thinking, this is tough going. Like, the Old Testament is tough going, but it actually, I have to adjust to it.
Yeah.
It's not going to adjust to me.
No.
So I'm responding to the heart. Like, it's so polarized. It's kind of really, the issues are serious issues that perhaps I don't take as seriously as I should. I'm having to adjust to actually accept what I'm reading. If you don't, you're just going to say, it's too harsh, it's too dark, it's too... And actually, there's a lot of light here, but it's a fiery, blazing light that's going to burn your mind out. Like, honestly, and I think, it is tough going, but I think as you say, the very promise lies exactly there.
Because it is really, and I'll dare say it, as I persist with it, there is something breaking within me, or some realization that I'm having around God. And I'm realizing, man, now I understand more about what Jesus was saying in this passage, or what Paul is saying in this passage, or, you know, because these stories and these laws were in their minds and hearts.
Yeah.
And so as they're expressing it, it all comes out of this. Yeah. And I feel like, as the modern church who wants to skip over these parts and just get to the good bits in Jesus, we're so shallow.
Yeah.
I'm so shallow in my understanding of it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going into the deep roots of what's actually going on here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, totally. I think it'd be good to talk through some just general features of the laws. So we've talked about this, you know, this relational element. You know, God is looking for the hearts of people to be inclined. There's this idea of that is necessary because we need a listening heart, as it were, in order to know God. There's a level of softness, of porousness that is required to allow ourselves to be handled by God. So, you know, in this sense, the word is a living thing. It's something that handles us. And if you're not willing to be kind of manhandled by the Word of God and transformed by it, it'll bounce off you, and it'll that will feel like spiritual deafness. So I think that's the first thing. It's a book that's calling us to decision. It's decision really is the key idea, is a key idea in this book. Because God is saying to his people, I've done all of these things. The problem with the former generation is that they chose against following me. So now you need to make different decisions. And so there's so much is put onto these people. This life can be heaven or hell for you, depending on the decisions that you make. Okay, so I'm telling you, walk this way. But if you reject if you reject this. So very strong emphasis on this idea that they get to determine. We as human beings have given, in some sense, the dreadful, and I mean that in a positive sense, if that's possible, the dreadful responsibility, like dreadful, in the sort of an original meaning of that word of sort of awe and dread, and of self-determination. I mean, our decisions have eternal consequences for us. So making the right decision, and that comes through in the book of Deuteronomy. Then to get into some of and I think this is another important thing, is that the laws of Deuteronomy are given against the backdrop of an ancient world. First of all, an ancient world steeped in idolatry that we need to realize is not harmless, just that it's in the sense that it's just falsehood, it's a harmless lie. No, they actually, they were about to go into a land permeated with cults of such a depth of evil, real dark spiritual powers permeated that land. This is the very reason why, this is the reason cited as to why God says, go and destroy absolutely everything, because I'm sending you into the darkest place on the planet. Like, this is the darkest spiritual valley on the planet. This is why God chooses that place, according to what it actually says. Because God says it's not because of you and your righteousness it's because of the sin of the Canaanites. And so he's sending them into this really deep, dark place, and he's saying you need to eradicate all of that spiritual darkness. And so they're going into this this situation. They need to be a light in the midst of the darkness. That's actually God has put him into the darkest place to be a light. The laws are designed to actually be intelligible to ancient peoples. This is an important point, because we look at the laws and we think that they're kind of unintelligible to us because we are living 3,500 years later. But these laws are actually meant to be intelligible to them. So they can't be too different to laws that they're familiar with, in the ancient world. There's got to be some element of crossover. So, and as we see, scholars have studied done contrasts and comparisons with other ancient Near Eastern laws. And there are similarities, a concern for social order, general social justice, protection of property and various things. However, there are some key differences. In the ancient world, protection of the order meant protection of the social order. It didn't mean upturning the social order of the high caste people and the low caste people, whereas the biblical law obliterates that kind of those social distinctions, absolutely obliterates them. So property is redistributed. Every after 49 years, complete redistribution. Debts are to be cleared. Completely, all debts are to be dissolved after 7 years. Slaves are to go free. So this is, in the context of the ancient world, this is just remarkable. And to see, the idea here is this isn't a law protecting the king and a nobility. This is a law to which the king himself is answerable. Okay, so that's another unique feature. This isn't the king handing the law as part of his responsibility of keeping order. No, he himself actually comes under this law and is accountable to the blessings and curses of the law. This strong heart element of this isn't just ethics. God's not just this is not just a law that's just about you doing the right thing and I don't care whether you want to or not. Yeah. No, God cares that we want to. Yeah. Wanting to, in fact, is the key aspect here. So that's another very important element of the Old Testament law. The things like other interesting points of contrast. Protection of all peoples and all life, including, the land has a Sabbath. Your animals also observe the Sabbath.
Yes.
Do not muzzle the ox while it's treading out the grain. Yep. Concern for the welfare. It's like everyone and everything is protected by this law. All classes, as I said, it gets rid of class. But, for example, slavery, which was just part of the ancient world, it doesn't outright say abolish slavery, but it is transformed to the point where it really doesn't look like
the slavery in other nations.
And also, slaves were permitted to go free. And the other interesting thing, if this is in... for example, in the law of Hammurabi's law, which is an ancient Babylonian law, to harbour an escaped slave was an offence under that ancient law. If you didn't send that slave back to be punished by his master, then according to the law of Hammurabi, you were culpable. It's the opposite under the biblical law. You are not to send back. Yeah. An escaped slave. If a slave comes to you, then you actually need to look after him and not send him back. So that's an interesting feature of the Old Testament law as well. The other thing that is quite ubiquitous in ancient laws is that children can be given over as payment for the sins of the parents. Yep. So if you do this and this, you have to give over your son or daughter, to be killed. Whereas in the biblical law, and again, against the ancient backdrop, this is quite a remarkable change, is that could never happen. Each person is culpable for their own sins.
Yeah. So this is all part of the bulk of the book, in the center of the book, as Moses sort of retells the history, sort of captures, gets everybody caught up with their history at the beginning, yep. 6 or 7 or 8 chapters there. And then he really goes into, as you're outlining here, he retells the law in a, in some parts expanded and in some parts simplified version. Yeah. That's what's going to concern these young people, this younger generation, as they go into this new land. And he's extolling them in different, clarifying, how things are to be judged, clarifying how things are going to work as they enter into the land. And you've got to listen to it in that mindset of, this is a new people. They're learning from the mistakes of their their fathers and their grandfathers. Yeah. They're looking ahead about what is going to happen. Yeah. What do we have to keep in mind as we're about to finally enter into this promised land? And it's all very, I want to say, I don't know if this is the right word, Matt. Maybe fix it for me. But it's very conditional. What Moses is saying is God has promised all these things, but it's conditional. Here's the conditions as you enter into the land. If you do this, a great blessing is going to come. You're righteous. This is how you get righteousness, by doing these things and being close to the Lord. And he really outlines some very practical things for them to do.
But it's not conditional in the sense that you earn God's favor in this way.
No.
This is how you live in blessing. It's like, blessing isn't just a free gift that gets sent to you regularly.
And you can do it whatever you want.
Blessing is a state of being, right? So a state of blessedness is, it's pictured in Psalm 1 as like the fruitful tree whose leaves never wither. And, God is saying that you will be like that, and because remember, this is not just there's a very specific purpose here. It's that they would be fruitful, that they would be a light to the nations. That's what it means to be full of light, and to radiate that light is that state of blessing. So, God is saying, I want to bless you, and I want you to be a blessing. Yeah. But you've got to do what I say. You've got to stick with me for that.
So condition might not be the right word. It might be a way of looking at it like, I want you to be a blessing, and this is what it looks like when you are living in that blessing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you actually, in the same way as Abraham needed to leave and go with God, this is basically saying the same thing. You need to come, you need to walk with me closely, and this is what this actually means. To do that. So it's conditional in that sense that they have to stick with God. These are blessings are found in God, and they have to stick with God.
Yes.
It's not like, oh, God's going to just follow me around and bless. And I think a lot of sometimes, again, this is a misapplication of this idea that, in Jesus we have forgiveness and we can just go about our lives and God's going to be our little genie who follows us around, blessing us with whatever we need. Oof. No, that's not the plan. The plan is that God is God, and He has an absolute claim on our lives, and we stick with God. And we have access to that blessing through Jesus Christ. You don't have to earn access to that. But once you get access, you actually need to access it.
Yeah.
And you access it by turning around from going the wrong way and start going the right way with God. That's what we have access to.
Yeah. So let's just, as we're running out of time here, the last 8 or 10 chapters here of the book, from about chapter 26, 27 onwards to the end, Moses wraps up sort of retelling the law. He gives them some personal encouragement. He gives them some personal commands. Make sure you do this as you enter here. Remember the covenant, write these things on some stones over here and put them over there. All these like little practical thing that Moses is doing them. Yeah. He really outlines in chapter 28, this is what it means to be obedient and being blessed. This is what it means to be, disobedient and be cursed. He sort of goes on that. He exhorts them as the next generation not to do the things that the generation before them did. He goes on. And then finally towards the end, it builds up to a crescendo. He takes Joshua and he says, Joshua, you are my replacement. You are the man that God is going to use to do this. The things that I could not do, Joshua, you're going to do. He gives, he talks to the Levites again. He commands them. He sings a song. He has poetry. He does all these beautiful things at the end. And then he's, giving God glory. And then he says, it's time for me to go. And up Nebo he climbs by himself.
Yep.
And he, sees the promised land that he never entered, the whole thing that he was destined to do, that he forfeited himself out of that generation. He sees it, God shows it to him, and he passes away.
Yeah, and we should say enters into the real promised land. Because, the land of Canaan was really just a kind of provisional prefigurement of something greater. And I know far in the future, months and months from now, we'll get into the book of Joshua, which is like the sequel. Yeah, that's right.
The sequel of this.
Yeah.
And for the most part, let me just let everybody be assured, this next generation, they were listening in that way that you've described to be listening. Taking it to heart and ready to do. We see that Joshua and Caleb and the men who were following him, they were listening. On the most part, we get a few exceptions, but my goodness, they were really listening.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
it's interesting, I've stood on Mount Nebo and you look across it on a clear day. You're basically looking across the Dead Sea basin, and I find that like even the symbolism of where Moses was, and that he looks across what is the lowest place on earth, this Dead Sea, and on the other side of that is the Promised Land. There's something about that, the sort of symbolism of that hasn't, is not lost to me when I stand in that place, because it's a beautiful view, but you're looking across. You're looking across essentially the sort of northern end of the Dead Sea, and that idea of it's sort of through this low and dead area on the other side of this, and Moses himself dies, and he's enters into the real promised land. But there is this moment here that really prepares us for an amazing story that's going to follow. And that is preempted by the last sort of few chapters there in Deuteronomy, this, almost this inevitability, you're going to stray away. And all of these terrible things are going to happen. But God says, but listen, you remember this, that if you cry out to me, I'll forgive you, and I'll draw you back to myself, and we'll start over. Yeah. And this is the beautiful thing about this, that if we make the wrong decision, we can always make the right decision. As long as we live, we can start afresh. We can come back to God. I know it's this. Yes, it seems so harsh and it's so polarized here, and there's a sternness in God, but it's always, grace is always the last word here. And I think this is a really poignant point for us, that when we make the wrong decision, when we get it wrong, you might think, I've made decisions, have I forfeited everything? No, actually, God's plan goes on, and you can step back. You can step back on track at any point. And so there's always that. And what we see in the story to follow is all of the things described in Deuteronomy. In fact, the history from Joshua through to 2 Kings is referred to by scholars as the Deuteronomistic history, because it's everything that's written in Deuteronomy kind of actually happens and is played out in these books. And in many ways, these are showing really the fulfillment of the, implicit, promises and warnings that are written in Deuteronomy. And yet, whenever God's people cry out, God hears and answers and restores them. There's always good news in the end.
I don't know if you could feel it as much as I could, but I feel like God is really calling us to something deeper, to something more about himself through the book of Deuteronomy. Of all things, through the book of Deuteronomy, through these sermons from Moses. Who would have thought that this would all happen from the book of Deuteronomy? Well, I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. Make sure you stick around for in a fortnight's time when we get into Deuteronomy part 2. And then we're going to leave the Old Testament behind us for a little while as we go into the New Testament. It's going to be very exciting. That's on future episodes moving ahead. And don't forget everything I've told you about Facebook, Instagram, all the changes on our social media. We would love you to be part of it and part of this thriving, see what I did there, thriving community. If you need any more information about it, just head over to thrivetoday.tv. All right, until next time, bless you, and we hope this helps you to thrive.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew and DJ really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading in the Bible as you go through it with Thrive. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all of our resources and much more at our website, thrivetoday.tv. The Thrive Today Network is on Facebook. Our Facebook page and links to our community groups are waiting for you. Just search and like Thrive Today page in Facebook now. Visit ratethispodcast.com/thrivedeeper. If you appreciate what we do and want to help us reach more people, go to ratethispodcast.com/thrivedeeper. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper into God's Word and thrive. This was another DJP.FM production.